Well, good morning to everyone. Today, our subcommittee conducts a second oversight hearing regarding the $7.2 billion provided by the Economic Recovery Act for broadband programs. The Act requires that the programs be administered by the U.S. Department of Commerce through the NTIA and by the Department of Agriculture through the Rural Utilities Service. It's our pleasure this morning to welcome the NTIA Director, Assistant Secretary for Communications and Information, Larry Strickling, and the Rural Utilities Service Administrator, Jonathan Adelstein, both of whom are well known to members of this subcommittee. They will discuss the process they have undertaken for the first round of funding and the standards that their agencies have developed that will govern the funding awards. The Recovery Act's broadband program presents an historic opportunity for increasing the availability of broadband and elevating the standing of the United States among the developed nations in the world in the percentage of the population that uses broadband. But the program will only be as effective as the standards that govern the grant awards and the loans, as those standards enable it to be. I have some concerns which I'll express this morning, that the standards that have governed the first round of funding need to be modified for the upcoming rounds, and I will encourage the agencies to consider modifying them accordingly. My first concern regards access to grant funding for rural applicants. In many circumstances involving very small communities that lack broadband, only through grant funding, as distinct from loan funding, can broadband access be achieved. While in some situations loan funding can be sufficient, for communities with very small populations that are isolated by mountains, the cost of building broadband can be great, and with populations of as few as 100 homes, that cost cannot be recovered through the revenues to be realized from the broadband service itself. In those situations, which are commonly found, only through the award of grants can broadband infrastructure be built. In the RUS program, a grant of between 80% and 100% of project costs is only available to communities that are determined to be remote, and any community that is within 50 miles of a city of at least 20,000 in population is considered to be non-remote, disqualifying that community from receiving grants of more than 50% under the RUS program. Almost the entire eastern United States is disqualified from the 80% to 100% grants by what I think is a very inappropriate standard. And in mountainous terrain, the standard of being within 50 miles or something less than 50 miles of a city of 20,000 is not a reasonable yardstick for determining need. In Virginia, in West Virginia, and in other states in the Appalachian region, hundreds of communities in isolated mountain valleys may be within only a few miles of a city, but because of the high cost of building the fiber optics or wireless links in those challenging topographies, and given the very small size of the population to be served, only through grants of 80% or more of a project cost can these communities receive broadband. The previously existing RUS Community Connect program is well suited to the need that I've described, but that program is very small, with only $13 million having been available for grants on a nationwide basis in one recent year. I would urge that in round two, the definition of remote be changed to qualify more truly isolated communities that may be close to a city. In the circumstances I've described, that proximity is functionally irrelevant. My second concern is that for rural applicants to be considered for the NTIA program, which has more flexible rules for making grants of 80% to 100%, the application must first go to RUS and be rejected by RUS before NTIA can make an award to that applicant. As a practical matter, I wonder if by the time RUS has reviewed and rejected an application as not qualified under RUS rules, if there is time remaining within that funding cycle for NTIA to review the application and consider it on an equal footing with applications that are initially directed to NTIA. And in the next funding round, I hope that you will consider allowing applicants to designate the funding agency that will be primary for purposes of considering an applicant's application. My third concern relates to the standards that are used to determine areas that are underserved. They appear to be highly restrictive. One of three standards would have to be satisfied for an area to be deemed underserved. The first of these is that no more than 50% of homes could have a broadband connection greater than 768 kilobits per second. That's a very slow data rate that many would not consider to be true broadband. A speed of at least 1.5 megabits per second might be more appropriate. A second standard that independently could qualify an application for underserved funding is that no provider advertises download speeds of at least 3 megabits per second in the area. But I would suggest that advertising is not a truly reliable measure of genuine broadband availability, since advertised speeds frequently exceed the real data rate that subscribers receive. The third standard is that the rate for household subscribership is 40% or less in areas that have broadband. The national take rate, I would note, is 55%, and we're told that few places where broadband is found have take rates of 40% or less. And so I'm concerned that these standards will result in many communities finding that the program is less helpful to them than we intended for it to be. My final concern is that apparently the states have been handed NTIA's entire basket of applications for initial review. We intended for NTIA to have final decision-making over its applications, and I'm looking for assurance that NTIA, in fact, will have that final decision-making. We have recently heard, in our case from the state of Virginia, that they were somewhat surprised to have received the entire group of applications directed to NTIA from Virginians, and had anticipated only receiving a selected group of applications that had been pre-screened through NTIA, and frankly the state doesn't feel prepared to undertake that challenge. And so I would appreciate your response as to why that happened, and also some suggestion that we're looking for that you are going to retain final decision making with regard to these. I have exceeded my time rather substantially, and the chair intends to be very generous with other members who want to express their concerns or make their comments with regard to these matters. The gentleman from Florida, the ranking Republican on our subcommittee, Mr. Stearns, is recognized for his opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. And let me, first of all, congratulate Secretary Strickling on his confirmation as Commerce Assistant Secretary for Communications and Information. I believe this is your first opportunity to testify, so welcome. I also want to welcome the Administrator, Adelstein, who has testified before this committee before, in fact, a number of times in different roles. So you're to be commended for your being adaptable here. So from broadband deployment to spectrum policy, you both of you certainly have your hands full, and I appreciate your public service here. These issues are of tremendous importance to the telecommunications sector, and in fact, when you talk about that sector, you're talking about the entire economy. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 provides a total of $7.2 billion for broadband, $2.5 billion of which will go to the rural utility services, and the remaining $4.7 billion will go to the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. In addition, the Federal Communications Commission will consult with the NTIA and RUS and develop a national broadband strategy, making sure these programs are administered fairly, efficiently, and transparently is one of their top priorities and my top priority also. All of us agree that broadband has the opportunity to transform everyday lives from how we work, how we receive medical information, telemedicine in the future, and how we are entertained. What is needed, my colleagues, is the long-term investment in broadband infrastructure that is based upon free market principles and not just the government-run and owned, operated system. We have a remarkable opportunity to start another technological revolution, and I hope we don't squander this opportunity. So I applaud the focus on this type of transformational infrastructure. This can be only transformational if done right and provides enormous long-term economic benefit. Unfortunately, the haste, I believe, with which the stimulus package was drafted and enacted, and the very short time frame it gives the NTIA and RUS to implement the program creates sort of a risk in my mind that taxpayers' dollars will not be used effectively. Dispensing this sort of money, this amount of money, entrusted to the NTIA and the RUS in a manner that is fair and efficient and effective, that will be a significant challenge to both of you gentlemen. We're going to have to commit ourselves to vigorous oversight, and so, Mr. Chairman, I recommend at a later time we do have further hearings to look into oversight, how much of this huge billions and billions of dollars that are going to be going out in a short amount of time, how it's being used. To ensure that the NTIA and the RUS would prioritize grants in states that have completed broadband maps so that we know that the grants are well targeted. This can also help to ensure that requests are made and provide a valuable incentive to complete maps in the remaining states as thoroughly and quickly as possible. In fact, I believe that no money should be spent until mapping is complete and the FCC broadband plan is finished, and which I think will be early next year. This national broadband plan will set forth goals and policies on how to best improve broadband access. So it just makes sense that we should know where to spend the money before it is actually spent, and why not have these studies complete first? In addition, the NTIA and the RUS should prioritize grants in unserved areas before underserved areas. We should ensure that everyone gets first before others are allowed to get seconds and thirds. Allocating funds to underserved areas first could distort the marketplace because companies will be forced to compete with government-subsidized competitors. This will also spread the subscriber base thin in what is already a difficult market to serve, providing each company with even less revenue to upgrade their facilities. And finally, the funds should be targeted to projects that demonstrate they can exist without government continued subsidizing into the future, so that in 3 to 4 years we do not need to have them come back and say we need a bailout because we cannot meet our continued development. The NTIA and the RUS should not be in the business of funding projects that will impose new and expansive demands on the Universal Service Fund tomorrow. How they recognize these projects will be a difficult task. I'm also concerned about the use of the stimulus funding process to expand on the FCC broadband policy statement obligations. I have been a skeptic of net neutrality, and these obligations strike me as another unjustified step down the slippery slope towards regulation of the Internet. I doubt that these non-discrimination rules will benefit consumers, expand broadband adoption, or drive network availability in areas that simply lack broadband access. I fail to see how the imposition of these obligations dovetail with the rationale for the stimulus package in the first place, the near-term creation of jobs. If done right, we have a tremendous opportunity to boost our economy and transform the way we live, but if we throw money indiscriminately at the problem, only to say we're doing something, I don't think we'll accomplish our long-term economic goals, and also will not provide broadband investment the best means of deployment. So we cannot let this opportunity pass. I welcome this hearing, and Mr. Chairman, I look forward to further discussions and talking to our witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns, and let me assure you that we will be having further hearings on the broadband stimulus program. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Stupak, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding the second oversight hearing on the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Welcome, Mr. Strickling, Mr. Adelstein, to our committee. I look forward to your testimony today. I also wish to thank John Morabito with the NTIA, along with John Claffey and Jessica Sufulo with the RUS for speaking at our Rural Caucus staff briefing on the stimulus package that we hosted in July. It was great help to all of us and to our staffs. The broadband access is of high interest for rural communities that wish to be part of today's 21st century economy. This interest was demonstrated in real numbers when 2,200 entities filed applications totaling $28 billion in requests with the Departments of Commerce and Agriculture for broadband grants and loans this August. A quick search on Broadband USA shows Northern Michigan alone accounts for 54 of these applicants, totaling more than $100 million in requests in middle mile, last mile, and remote projects. Of course, these numbers far exceed the actual amount Congress appropriated towards expanding broadband access, but we all knew the demand would outpace the funding. The Broadband Technology Opportunities Program and the Broadband Initiatives Program represents opportunities for the federal government to demonstrate that the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act can permanently improve the quality of life for rural communities. Now, that is not to say that the funding distributed so far have not been a necessary investment in our rural infrastructure. But at the end of the day, it is access to broadband that will make rural America's economy competitive for years to come. That leaves an enormous challenge for our witnesses and the agencies they represent. There's a lot of questions on how the applications will be handled and what mechanisms will be put in place to ensure the public money is distributed fairly. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I yield back the last 7 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stupak. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How generous of Mr. Stupak with those 7 seconds. I'll try to be as courageous and bold. I want to thank you for the hearing and also for Ranking Member Stearns. You know, we are spending and plan to spend a huge chunk of taxpayers' dollars and actually increased indebtedness for this program. And this oversight hearing and next oversight hearings that the chairman has promised are very, very important in this process. As an opponent of the stimulus bill, I am receptive to being proved wrong in certain areas. During the district work period, I went to Carlisle Lake, a Corps of Engineer lake, and really 50% of their backlog of unmet needs are being filled by some stimulus dollars. So where I still would have voted no, I'm willing to say there are some positive things that might be going on and highlight that. So that's the importance of the oversight, to really make sure that taxpayers' indebtedness, there is a good return on that, and that's the importance of the job that you all are doing. When we had our first oversight hearing, we had the California Public Utilities Commissioner here, and the question I posed, which I think is already kind of precedent based upon what some of the comments that have already been made, is she testified that they would have spent money poorly had they not had done broadband mapping first. And so I would like to encourage that. I would not go as far as the ranking member of this committee saying no money should be doled out before that. But I do think that those areas that have done broadband mapping and have already invested should also be taken into consideration of when we look at where this money should go. Connect Southern Illinois has been trying to do that in Southern Illinois. That's modeled after the Kentucky program. We've had numerous hearings on that. I would hope that that would be taken into consideration. And Commissioner Adelstein, we talked prior to the hearing about 911 and PSAPs. That's part of my opening comment. That's the public safety aspect of this is really critical as we look at the importance of the broadband delivery system to emergency services, communications, and you know, in rural parts of the country, they just are not at the point of major metropolitan areas, and so I did not live up to Bart Stupak's time commitment. I apologize, and I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shimkus. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for your leadership on this very important issue and for calling the second hearing. I'd also like to thank Mr. Strickling and Mr. Edelstein for being with us here today, and look forward to your testimonies. We're here today to examine the efforts of NTIA and RUS in carrying out the broadband programs established by the Recovery Act. The broadband package included a $7.2 billion investment in our nation's broadband system. This investment will help expand broadband access to more and more Americans across the nation. I'm particularly interested to hear how the broadband program is helping households, schools, libraries, health facilities, among others, in urban underserved communities and achieve greater access broadband services. In the current economic climate, more and more hardworking families need access to the internet to find a new job, manage their finances during this difficult period, obtain news alerts, apply to college. The broadband stimulus package will help build out the infrastructure to many more communities throughout this nation. Moving forward, I believe it's critically important that we address affordability of internet access for all. In doing so, it will truly help close the digital divide for millions of Americans. And that is why I will soon be introducing legislation that will expand the Universal Service Fund's Lifeline Assistance Program for universal broadband adoption. The legislation will help more lower-income Americans living in urban and rural areas with assistance in subscribing to affordable broadband services. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Matsui. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I'm concerned that the goal of improving the broadband access to those Americans without it today was not fulfilled in this first round of stimulus broadband funding. During the passage of the stimulus bill, the minority was assured that telecommunications carriers serving rural America would have access to stimulus dollars to deploy networks to their unserved customers throughout the RUS. Somewhere between passage and the RUS and NTIA releasing the rules for the first round of most of rural unserved America was left out. What we have today are rules that prohibit an applicant from receiving anything higher than 50% grant to serve a remote area. By definition, a remote area is a 50-mile radius from a population center of 20,000 or more. I'm not sure if it was the intent to exclude most of rural America, but that's exactly what happened. In Nebraska, you may have to drive a couple hundred miles to find a town that big. As a result of the remote definition, coupled with the burdensome regulation on the network, the three largest carriers in Nebraska have decided not to apply for broadband stimulus money. If the carriers that were shovel-ready are not willing to apply, then I'm concerned that the NTIA and RUS may award money to applicants who do not have the expertise or business to sustain networks in rural high-cost America. I want to associate with myself with the Chairman's remarks, particularly about the speed, and I hope to learn in today's hearing more about how the applications are being, will meet America's remote areas and rural needs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terry. The chairman of the Full Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Boucher, for holding this timely hearing. I want to welcome Assistant Secretary Strickling, who is appearing before our committee for the first time as the Administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, as well as Jonathan Adelstein, who left the Federal Communications Commission after 7 years of service as a commissioner to lead the Rural Utility Services. Welcome you both. I also want to congratulate both of you on your recent confirmations, and we look forward to working with you. As you are well aware, the overriding purpose of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 was to stimulate the economy by creating and preserving jobs. NTIA and RUS deserve high praise for issuing the initial application guidelines in a timely fashion while incorporating enhanced transparency and accountability measures. And I'm pleased that the Notice of Fund Availability broadly reflects the objectives of the Recovery Act in stimulating the economy, creating and saving jobs, and extending broadband to hard-to-reach and underserved communities. You and your staffs have worked around the clock to get the program up and running so that Recovery Act funds might have an immediate impact, and thank you for your ongoing efforts. There are many skeptics who said you could not get it done, and there were those who said that Congress placed so many conditions on these funds there would be too few applicants to make this effort worthwhile. Contrary to these fears, the response to the NOFA has been overwhelming. It is clear that the public interest obligations that attach to this public money have not deterred interest or innovation. And it's clear that with 2,200 applications seeking over $28 billion in funds, there is a keen interest across the telecommunications and technology sector in providing all of our citizens with access to advanced broadband networks. I'm confident that broadband stimulus funds will lead to new and innovative offerings that benefit our nation. But we all understand that your work is just beginning. Now that you have established the framework for releasing these funds, you must make certain they are released wisely, transparently, and efficiently. I think most members of this committee and the American public recognize that this overall program is an unprecedented endeavor in scope and speed. We understand that you will want to refine certain details to improve performance and maximize the benefits of the public's investment in these efforts. And I know you'll be interested in receiving constructive suggestions from both sides of the aisle. I look forward to hearing your testimony, and I thank you for being here today, and I thank the Chairman for convening the hearing.
Thank you very much, Chairman Waxman. The gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome both of you. Mr. Adelstein, it is going to be a pleasure to continue our ongoing conversation about broadband and intellectual property. Mr. Strickling, congratulations. I've enjoyed my visit with you and look forward to more. I think all of you know that I am very concerned about broadband deployment and the effect that that has on my constituents in Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. And I am also going to look forward to hearing from you all not only about how we go about with that broadband deployment and the program that is before us and the oversight we need to do on this, addressing the applications, addressing spectrum relocation, how to best achieve our shared goal of universal access, and the development of a broadband map, the use of those maps, all topics that you've heard from others. This morning I do want to touch on one thing I don't think anyone's touched on, and that's non-discrimination in Internet content. And I support the policy goal of ensuring that all Americans do have access to broadband. Universal broadband access can greatly increase economic opportunity for all Americans. Indeed, many times we've talked about the need for this in the rural part of my district as they look at economic jobs, recruitment, and retention. So it's important not only to me but to all of us. The Internet, though, should not be neutral with respect to unlawful content. I fear that misguided non-discrimination regulations that fail to distinguish between legal and illegal content would undermine broadband adoption. So I know I am out of time, but I do want to highlight that with you all. I'm also going to want to look at how you spend the $7 billion in the broadband stimulus funds, where that's going to go, how those are going to be vetted, how we're going to be vetting those applications. I've got a couple of concerns that I want to highlight on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blackburn. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Space, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Boucher and Ranking Member Stearns, and to our witnesses today, Assistant Secretary Strickling and Mr. Adelstein, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here, and I'd like to congratulate you both on your recent appointments. The task Congress presented to NTIA and RUS at the beginning of the year was daunting. I commend both of your teams for taking on the challenges of the statute in implementing a number of innovative approaches. Streamlining the application process to eliminate duplicity and promote efficiency in time and resources seems to have warranted praise from many sectors, and the efforts you've undertaken in holding public forums and workshops are to be commended as well. Furthermore, I hope that your commitment to transparency remains as we move ahead. I do believe that following the completion of the first round of funding, there is some room for improvement. Fortunately, the process is structured to allow for such changes to be made before progressing with the second round of funding. Specifically, I'm concerned that the RUS's definition of remote may exclude regions of the country very worthy of seeing those Recovery Act dollars. And the state of Ohio, in particular, remains essentially ineligible for these funds, and I think some of my constituents in Appalachia would argue that they live in truly remote areas. I do look forward to working with you both as part of this ongoing process, and of course, I share your support for providing broadband access and the seemingly infinite benefits that such access affords to all Americans. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Space. The gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Christensen, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. You know, when it came to deciding my second subcommittee, I was torn, but your leadership, Mr. Chairman, and the importance of the work of the subcommittee to, as the President said last night, to not just dealing with crisis, but to building a future has reaffirmed that I made a good choice, the right choice. I also want to welcome Assistant Secretary Strickling and Administrator Adelstein, both to your positions in here this morning. I'm not going to use my opening remarks to lay out concerns. I'll get to some of those in the questioning period, but I share some of them that have already been expressed. Today, I just want to commend both agencies for the way you've worked together and have reached across the country, and for your commitment to simplifying the process, to bringing broadband to every person in this country, and to using the federal dollars that have been entrusted to you efficiently, effectively, and responsively. The U.S. Virgin Islands and I have had a long relationship with RUS, and so I know of your long experience in carrying other technology across the country. And we appreciate not only that you don't forget us, but you always include the territories. And we applaud your ability to have leveraged your $2.5 billion to over $7 billion. NTIA, when you were here before, you convinced me that you were not only aware of the territories, but embraced the fact that your responsibility extended to us. And being a representative both in my district and as a racial minority of those who are referred to in your testimony and your priorities as our most vulnerable populations, I applaud the goal to close the broadband gap and bring maximum broadband benefits to communities that are often left out and left behind. Speaking on behalf of my own and other providers, we also appreciate that stimulating broadband demand is also one of the priorities. So I look forward to the discussion after your presentations. I know the devil is in the details, but thank you once again for your aggressive approach to building for our future.
Thank you very much, Ms. Christensen. The gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to thank you for your leadership on this issue, and especially holding this hearing this morning. I want to thank Mr. Strickling and Mr. Adelstein for your work in developing the definitions and putting together a framework for releasing the funds. I understand that a large number of applications have been received, far larger than what was predicted, and so it's critically important that we distribute those monies in a way that creates jobs and improves broadband service throughout the country. So with that in mind, I look forward to working with you all to make sure that we meet those goals. And with that, I just yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. McNerney. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshu, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be back, and I want to welcome the two outstanding people that are here today, Assistant Secretary Strickland, and of course the administrator, the new administrator, Jonathan Adelstein. It's wonderful to see you in your new position, and I congratulate you. I'm really pleased that we have this opportunity to talk not only about your roles in the broadband stimulus program, because we're really depending on you on both NTIA and the RUS to ensure that the recovery funds really spur growth and speed economic recovery in our country. It's why the language and the dollars were placed in that very large package, and I think one of the most important parts of it. So I know that you're going to work hard to meet these priorities. Assistant Secretary Strickland, we had a Strickland on our committee, so I'm sorry for the slip of tongue. You've taken over NTIA at a time when it's really shifting gears and readjusting its priorities. You've gone from handing out DTV coupons to reviewing broadband applications in the space of a few weeks, so that's a big shift. And we want to see you prosper in this. In May of this year, Representative Markey and I wrote to Secretary Locke and Secretary Vilsack to urge the prioritization of broadband projects under the Recovery Act based on advanced capabilities and speeds. Improved access to distance learning, telemedicine, economic growth, and job creation are dependent upon network construction that delivers capacity for high bandwidth applications. We don't want to start out moving like a turtle. We want to, when this is implemented, we want it at the highest speeds possible. That's really how we're going to define success, in my view anyway. The Recovery Fund should go toward this goal, as well as projects aimed at unserved areas. I know that the first round of applications brought forward some complaints, from software breakdowns to onerous application questions that might reveal proprietary information. There are concerns that the program doesn't encourage higher speeds in underserved markets or spur anchor institutions, but focuses instead on lower speeds in rural regions. Rural regions should not be subjected to lower speeds, period. This is the United States of America. I think we should have the highest standards and the highest speeds across the entire country. Just because they're rural should not equate to low speed. Thankfully, we're only in the first round of the process, and the funds remain available to achieve all of Congress's priorities and goals. I hope you have a plan to encourage projects that utilize the most advanced, highest bandwidth. I also hope you have a plan for addressing concerns about the application process and improving it during the next rounds. So again, thank you for taking on the jobs that you have. I'm sure that we're going to be working closely with one another and tracking this because it really is so important for the future of our country. So congratulations again, and I look forward to not only working with you, but also questioning you as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eshoo. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this, the second part of this very important hearing. This is an opportunity to hear testimony from Mr. Strickland as well as Administrator Adelstein. I want to sincerely congratulate both of your respective appointments for your respective appointments, and I certainly look forward to working with you to better serve the people of my state, which is the state of North Carolina, the 1st Congressional District. My district is a rural district. In fact, we are the 4th poorest district among the congressional districts in the country. As you know, $3.8 billion was made available through the first of 2 notices of funds availability for broadband deployment across the U.S. And these are critically important funds needed to help ensure that our struggling communities are able to join the global economy. America's unserved and underserved communities are decades behind our technologically advanced areas of the country. I know because I represent many of these communities. Access to broadband is something many of us take for granted, yet it is still out of reach for nearly half of all U.S. households. We have a responsibility to make certain that funding for broadband deployment be distributed to those communities with the greatest need. It is vitally important that these funds be distributed quickly and efficiently so that access to broadband technology will be realized throughout the country. Last January, during the full committee markup, I strongly advocated for Congress, not NTIA, to have the discretion to define unserved and underserved. While NTIA's definitions do identify a number of needy communities, many deserving communities are still being left behind. While broadband access may be available to just over 40% of households, it is certainly not affordable for low-income populations. And this is the situation in my hometown of Wilson, North Carolina. Since 2008, through a public effort, my city has spent $30 million in an effort to provide broadband service to every household. The city has been proactive in deploying broadband to households and aims to provide broadband services at reduced cost to every home within the city. While this city of Wilson is partially served by a high-priced broadband service provider, the city's service, called Greenlight, provides a fiber-to-home alternative. Unfortunately, without additional assistance, the city will be unable to continue to deploy affordable broadband access to low-income sections of the city. Mr. Chairman, I see that my time has expired. I ask unanimous consent that the entire statement be included in the record.
Without objection, and the Chair thanks the gentleman for his comments.
Yes.
And we welcome now our witnesses for this morning. And I want to add my voice to those of other members of the subcommittee. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not see Mr. Barton arrive, so my welcome to you will have to be postponed. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member of the Full Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Mr. Chairman, normally I wouldn't interrupt, but my staff's feelings are going to be hurt if I don't read at least some of their excellent opening statement. So let me thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing. Let me welcome Assistant Commerce Secretary Strickland and congratulate him on his recent appointment. And to our other witness, you've got a new job now. I'm used to seeing you as the FCC Commissioner, and now you've moved over. So we're glad that you're here. I'm glad we've got the DTV transition behind us, Mr. Chairman. You know, all of those worries of Armageddon turned out not to be true. The biggest problem was that I never got around to asking for a coupon, so I still have television sets that are inoperable, and it's the Congress's fault, you know. But I'm going to take it up with my congressman at the appropriate time with the appropriate letter of strong condemnation. Let's simply say that in terms of broadband implementation, my staff indicates that over 2,000 requests have been received for $28 billion. That's 4 times the amount of money that the Congress has allotted. So let me tell you two gentlemen, as long as you fund the applications in my congressional district, we won't have a lot of problems. And I guess Mr. Boucher and, you know, Mr. Shimkus and Mr. Terry, I'm looking on the other side, my friends over there, you know, fund the ones that are here in attendance when the gavel sounds, and we'll be okay. We do think that projects should be prioritized where the mapping is already complete. There's nothing in the statute that would prevent you from taking that. My understanding is that maps have been completed in at least 10 states, and there are 10 other states where they're almost completed. This is an opinion and not necessarily a fact, but I believe that there should be some prioritization for areas that are totally unserved as opposed to underserved, because underserved is in the eyes of the beholder, but unserved is unserved, and there's no, you know, that's an either-or digital decision. It's they either have service or they don't. I guess with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back and submit my formal statement for the record. But again, welcome our 2 witnesses, and we look forward to hearing your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Barton. And now I'm pleased to welcome our 2 witnesses and congratulate both of them upon their appointments to head their respective agencies. This subcommittee is very familiar with both of these gentlemen who have appeared before us previously. Mr. Strickland was at one time head of the Common Carrier Bureau at the FCC, and Mr. Adelstein for a number of years served as a commissioner at the FCC. And I would say that both of these agencies are certainly fortunate to have your services, as is the United States government. Mr. Strickland is now the Assistant Secretary for Communications and Information of NTIA. Mr. Adelstein is the Administrator for the Rural Utilities Service at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I want to commend both of you for the way in which you have coordinated your work as the standards for making grants and loans under the broadband program have been developed. I think it's commendable that you have worked together this well and that you have a seamless program for all intents and purposes. I think that serves our purposes in terms of making sure the program is effective, and I commend you for that coordination that you've undertaken. Without objection, your prepared written statement will be made a part of the record, and we would welcome your oral presentation of approximately 5 minutes. Mr. Strickland will be pleased to begin with you. And you'll need to turn your microphone, pull it a little closer to you, we can hear you better.
Very good.
Even closer still if you can. Yeah. I'm not sure it's working. Either that or it needs to be closer.
Okay.
There you
How's
go.
that?
That's better.
Very good. I've passed the first test. I want to thank all of you for the invitation to testify today on behalf of the NTIA on the implementation of the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program and the development of the National Broadband Map as set forth in the Recovery Act. I welcome this opportunity to come before you early in my tenure as Assistant Secretary to begin this dialogue and collaboration on our shared priorities of fostering innovation and growth in the communications and information sectors and ensuring that all of our citizens are able to participate in today's information age. I'm also very pleased to appear here today with Jonathan Adelstein, who oversees the Broadband Initiatives Program at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Our two agencies have been noted, have worked hand in hand the last several months to implement the broadband provisions of the Recovery Act, and the result has been a highly coordinated and well thought out approach that takes advantage of the individual expertise of the two agencies. The message we bring to you today is that we have put our programs in place, we have received an overwhelming response to our initial round of funding, and we look forward to the challenge of awarding grants later this fall to a diverse set of grant recipients. I want to assure you that these funds will be well spent. We expect to leverage these programs into significant and lasting improvements in America's technological innovation and economic health, which will allow us to take a significant step forward to achieve President Obama's vision of bringing the benefits of broadband to all Americans. Today, we are in the thick of reviewing the initial applications we received in late August. Between our two agencies, we received over 2,200 applications requesting nearly $28 billion in funding, which was 7 times the funding available in the first round. When we include the over $10 billion in matching funds that our applicants have committed, these applications represent more than $38 billion in proposed broadband projects. At least one application was filed for each state, each territory, and the District of Columbia. The applicant pool is diverse and includes states, tribal nations, local governments, nonprofit organizations, telephone, cable, and wireless companies, and anchor institutions such as schools, libraries, and hospitals. I'm very encouraged by this extremely high interest level shown by the applicants in our first round, and I urge all of you to take a look at our website, broadbandusa.gov, which is now up and running with a searchable database containing descriptions of all the applications we've received. Soon we will be posting the maps of the geographic areas of coverage proposed by our first round applicants. In our evaluation of these applications, first, at least 3 expert reviewers will grade each application against established criteria, including the proposed project's purpose, benefits, viability, and sustainability. These reviewers have been selected based on their expertise and background, and we are carefully screening them for any actual or apparent conflicts of interest. The reviewers' scores for each application will be averaged, and those applications considered the most highly qualified will advance for further consideration. Mr. Chairman, you made a comment raising a concern about the sequencing of our review, and I want to assure you that we're going to be looking at all of the applications that we've received and will not be waiting to review the joint applications submitted to both of our agencies until the Department of Agriculture has completed its review. So everything will be looked at in sequence without any delay. Each state and territory will be given the opportunity to prioritize and comment on the applications relevant to its jurisdiction. Again, to clear up any misconception, the states are not reviewing the applications in lieu of the reviews that we are conducting, and as always, we retain the decision as to which grants will be awarded. However, the Act does recognize that state and territorial officials have a unique perspective on broadband needs within their jurisdictions, and we look forward to their input. For those applications that merit further consideration, we will engage in additional due diligence, which will include our requesting supplementary information from applicants. NTIA staff will review and analyze this information and prepare recommendations as to which projects should be funded. Those recommendations will be presented to me, and I will make the final selections consistent with the statutory directives established in the Recovery Act. We expect to begin announcing grant awards in November and hope to complete the first round of awards by the end of the year. I'd also like to update the subcommittee on our progress to develop the National Broadband Map. Under the State Broadband Data and Development Grant Program, for which Congress appropriated $350 million, I am pleased to report that we received an application from every state, territory, and the District of Columbia. We will also be awarding grants to states to support their own planning efforts for broadband, just as the Recovery Act allows. With respect to those planning grants, 52 applicants requested a total of $26 million in funding for that planning project. As with the broadband grants, there will be a review by technical experts, followed by a second review performed by our own staff. We hope to award a broadband grant to every state, broadband mapping grant to every state, and if necessary, we will work with the states to revise and refine their proposals so that each proposal meets our standards. We expect to announce the first mapping awards by the end of September. We expect to receive a substantially complete set of state-level availability data by November, followed by a complete verified set of all requested data by next spring. We will complete that map by February 2011 as required by the Recovery Act. Even in the middle of all this activity to review the broadband applications and the mapping applications, we're constantly thinking about ways to improve the program. For example, our experience with this first round is leading both of our agencies jointly to explore the option of holding just one more round of funding. This may have the potential of yielding benefits for all stakeholders. First, it would enable us to complete the entire grant-making process in the summer of 2010 as opposed to next September, and expedite the stimulative benefits for the economy and job creation that the Recovery Act promises. Combining the second and third rounds into a single funding round would also allow us to adjust the next application deadline, giving additional time, first to the stakeholders to provide us with their views as to how the first round worked for them, and to our agencies so we can learn from our experience and adjust those aspects of the process that need to be improved. Finally, combining the two rounds may also save administrative expenses. With respect to the mapping program, we announced yesterday that we will initially fund the state data collection efforts for a 2-year period as opposed to the 5-year period originally contemplated. Again, this approach allows us to assess lessons learned, determine best practices, and investigate opportunities for improved data collection methods prior to awarding funds for subsequent years. Based on what we've received, we expect that the funding for 2 years will cost approximately $100 million, far less than the $350 million appropriated by Congress. And in no way will this change affect our ability to publish a comprehensive map by the February deadline. For both the broadband grants and the mapping grants, we are devoting substantial efforts to meeting our oversight obligations for the program. We are committed to ensuring that taxpayers' money is spent wisely and efficiently. Since the passage of the Act, we have been working with the Department of Commerce's Inspector General to design the program in a manner that minimizes the risk of waste, fraud, and abuse. Just last week, we met with the Inspector General's office to kick off its audit of the program as called for in the Recovery Act. As we move forward and begin to make awards, we will ramp up our auditing and monitoring responsibilities, including site visits to grantees. We're working extremely hard to ensure that the projects funded by the Recovery Act serve as valuable inputs to our long-term broadband strategy. I look forward to working with all of you in the months ahead to ensure that the nation's policies benefit our communications and information industries and American consumers. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strickland. Mr. Adelstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Stearns, Ranking Member Barton, and members of the subcommittee, and thank you for inviting me back to testify. Mr. Chairman, I especially appreciate your longstanding leadership and support of our mission to serve rural America. In my previous capacity in the FCC, I've worked closely with many of you, as you've indicated, to promote broadband across America and in rural areas as well. Increasing broadband deployment and adoption rates in rural areas is a top priority for President Obama, for USDA Secretary Vilsack, and all of us at RUS. I know it is for this subcommittee and for this Congress as well. It's a special honor to appear with my good friend Larry Strickling, who's done such an outstanding job of leading the NTIA through this period. Our challenge is clear. Broadband continues to lag in America, and it continues to lag in rural America, and we can't allow this to continue. A recent USDA study that we provided to the committee documented how rural communities with access to broadband create more jobs and have higher earnings. Those which lagged were economically handicapped. You've given us an historic opportunity through the Recovery Act to address this challenge and at the same time provide urgently needed stimulus to our economy. RUS has long and highly successful experience since its beginnings as the Rural Electrification Administration in 1935 in the deployment of electric, telephone, and water service in rural areas. We're now applying this expertise to a newer technology, to broadband. On telecom, we've been on the cutting edge. Since 1995, we required all new telecommunications capacity that we financed to be broadband capable. We've also had great success with our Community Connect and distance learning and telemedicine programs. The USDA Broadband Loan Program, created by the 2002 Farm Bill, has provided over $1.1 billion in loans to more than 90 broadband projects in rural communities spanning 42 states. So we've got experience. The Recovery Act marks a major new chapter in this effort. Since its enactment, we've worked side by side with our partners at NTIA, as Assistant Secretary Strickling indicated, with our partners at the FCC, my former colleagues, and with the White House to fulfill the President's vision for promoting broadband access across the nation. The collaboration between RUS and NTIA has been unprecedented. Our departments have traditionally performed very different roles, but I've been thrilled to join forces with someone of Secretary Strickling's caliber, as well as his talented staff, to bring broadband across the United States. As Mr. Strickling indicated, we've received an overwhelming demand for funding. The volume of applications demonstrates very clearly the still unmet need for broadband in rural America. RUS received nearly $18 billion in requests for $2.4 billion in funding in this round. And applications came from a wide array of partners, including state and local tribal governments, nonprofits, industry, and public sector organizations in all 50 states and all territories. We're now evaluating them, and we expect to begin awarding grants in November. We estimate that the $2.5 billion in budget authority entrusted to the RUS could translate into as much as $7 to $9 billion in grants, loans, and loan grant combinations to applicants. The first NOFA made available $2.4 billion of this total. This leaves around 3/4 of the total funds left for subsequent rounds. So any potential applicant that was unsuccessful in the first round or missed the opportunity to apply will still have ample opportunity to compete. As we did with the first NOFA, we plan intensive outreach efforts to open this process to as many potential applicants as possible. We'll take what we learned in the first round and your concerns, as many of you have articulated them today, to heart in developing our next round of funding. We're aware of the concerns that many of you and others have raised regarding a wide range of issues. These include the definition of rural and remote areas, eligibility standards for unserved and underserved areas, scoring weights for various factors, and concerns regarding satellite service. Without speculating about specific changes, we will be guided by your counsel and, of course, by the evaluation of the experience and the feedback from the first round of projects. We're prepared to make changes accordingly. This is a thoroughly collaborative process with our partners at NTIA. We'll avoid duplication, yet we'll exploit the synergies between NTIA, which is running a grant program, and the loan and grant authority available to the RUS. We're committed to very careful stewardship of taxpayers' dollars. We'll make this process as transparent and as efficient as possible. In fact, yesterday we posted on the web all of the applications in a searchable database I see that Congressman Stupak has already looked at it and seen how many he has in his district, and I encourage all of you to look at that. You'll be able to see exactly what has been proposed in your districts. There's a map right there Congressman Terry has. We plan to post maps of their service areas very shortly. So on behalf of all of us at USDA, we thank you again for your support for this critical mission. Your work has made possible this historic opportunity to restore economic prosperity and improve the quality of life in rural America. It's an honor to work with you on behalf of the 65 million Americans who live in our rural communities. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Adelstein, and thanks to both witnesses for your fine presentations here this morning. You heard my concerns expressed in my opening statement about the definition of remote, and I was pleased to hear you, Mr. Adelstein, say that that is one of the things that may be reconsidered with regard to the standards for the second round. Let me get you to elaborate just a bit on whether or not you share the concern that I've expressed. There are areas that are truly isolated that could be fairly close to a city. I saw a map yesterday that shows that virtually the entire eastern U.S. is disqualified from your highest level of grant, which is 80% to 100%, by virtue of the remote requirement. And any area that is within 50 miles of a city of at least 20,000 population is considered non-remote and therefore not qualified. This is the map. I don't know if you can see it. It's fairly small, but as you can see, these dark areas around the eastern U.S. are the unqualified areas based upon your definition of remote. There are some places in the west that are qualified, but in the east not. And in the Appalachian region, we have these very small pockets of communities that are in mountainous areas that could be within 5 or 10 miles of a city, but be, for all practical purposes, inaccessible. It's difficult to build the fiber links or wireless facilities that can serve such a community, very expensive. And if you've got 100 homes, the revenues that would be derived from a service that expensive serving that small a population would not be sufficient to repay a loan, or perhaps encourage a private sector partner to apply for a grant that could only be 50% of project cost. And yet that is the maximum grant to which, under your rule, such a community would be eligible. So that's the concern broadly stated. And I would just welcome your response, either of you. Mr. Adelstein, it's more in your territory, so let me start with you.
And your concern, I understand your concern. All of these issues are under consideration as we review the results of the first NOFA. We're going to go out for comment shortly in October, and we will make a decision based on our experience of the current applications and the round of data that we're getting from that. The RUS in the past has been criticized for being too urban, for going too close to urban areas with our funds, and we want to restore our mission to being as rural as possible, to going to the remote areas, and that was the impetus behind really forcing the largest amount of grant funds into the most remote parts of the country. We set aside $400 million for remote grants and saw a huge demand. Some people thought that there wouldn't be interest because of the narrow number of areas that are eligible.
Well, but let me just ask you if there was a geographic weighting with regard to where those applications came from. I'll bet most of them came from the western U.S., didn't they?
I can do an evaluation and supply that for the committee.
Well, it would be interesting to see the geographic breakdown of where that came from. Well, I hear you say you understand the concern we've expressed and that you're willing to consider it. Let me move on to some other issues. Mr. Strickland, I would like to get your further elaboration on the concerns we have just had expressed to us, at least by my state of Virginia, perhaps some other states, that unexpectedly they have now received your basket of applications, whereas in the past they had been given to understand that you were going to do the pre-screening and that only maybe the final applicants would be sent to them for their comments. And they feel unprepared from a resource standpoint to review the entire basket of applicants. So what's your response to that? Why did that happen? And what is it you're looking for from these states? And your microphone, please.
Thank you. Let me start with the second part of your question, because I think the burden on the states is not as great as perhaps they fear it is. What we're looking for from them is their sense of prioritization of the applications they've seen. We're specifically interested in understanding what areas of their states they believe are the ones in greatest need where we should look the most closest at applications. We're not asking them to review the applications the way we are going to look at them at NTIA to the extent of, is it a viable project, is it a sustainable project? They're welcome to do that. That's not what we're asking them to do. In terms of what they've been given obviously the same public access to the searchable database that everyone has. In addition, they will have access to the executive summaries, which is about a 5-page description of each project. That will be available to them, we hope, starting next week. Beyond that, if they want more information from the applications, we will facilitate getting them more information, but we are not sending them the full applications for their review.
All right. Well, let me ask this. You, in the end, are going to retain final decision-making with regard to all of these applications, are you not?
Absolutely.
And so you're looking to the states for comments, and you will consider those comments along with other matters in order to make those final decisions.
That's correct.
One additional question that I want to ask of you. You have said that you will be reviewing applications that are directed to both agencies, where that box is checked on the application saying that it is to be considered by both agencies. You will be reviewing those applications simultaneously.
Yes.
With RUS reviewing those applications.
Yes.
And you will not be waiting until RUS makes a decision with regard to whether or not that application is qualified before you start your review. So it would not have to be rejected first at RUS before you begin to review it. Is that correct?
That's correct. But we
so here's my follow-up question. While I understand that answer, as a practical matter, let's suppose that in the funding cycle, RUS doesn't get around to really rejecting that application until fairly late in the cycle. Now, in theory at least, it will have been reviewed in your office already, but by then you well may have made your prioritization of the applications you intend to fund. So would that application, with the rejection from RUS coming so late in the process potentially, mean that that application still, as a practical matter, would be considered on equal footing with the applications that were primarily directed to you?
Yes, sir. I think we will be able to handle that. We will obviously be in coordination and in contact with RUS through the review process. So I would hope to avoid the situation where there's a last-minute rejection on their part of a grant that we would like to fund if we know they're not going to fund it. And I think that through the coordination we expect to have, we should be able to avoid that problem.
So as I interpret your answer, you would be prioritizing all of the applications you receive, whether they are directed solely to you or directed both to you and RUS, at the same time. And you would not be preparing one priority list just of the applications directed to you. Any application you receive, whether only to you or to you and RUS, would be eligible for that initial priority list, so that if the rejection comes late, that application would in fact still be on equal footing with those directed just to you. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Strickland. My time has expired. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to review, the stimulus package had $7.2 billion, of which $4.7 the NTIA is going to spend, and the RUS is going to spend $2.5 billion. Now, it's my understanding that the bill indicates that you have to spend all of this by September of next year. Is that roughly your understanding, both
yes.
of you? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now, when you set the criteria to determine who's going to get awarded this, are you going to also put this on the web page so that the applicants have an understanding when they compete with others? What is the criteria? What is the minimum acceptable requirements for proposed projects? Mr. Strickling, you start first.
Congressman Stearns, I would suggest that that's already been provided to applicants in the notice.
Is that on the website?
On the notice of funds availability issued in July, which is on the website, as well as guidance to applicants, which was a separate set of materials, as well as through our workshops. We have taken folks through all of the criteria for the project, most of which are drawn directly from the legislation, so folks should have a clear understanding of that. We also expect that as awards are made later this fall, that will also provide a lot of guidance to applicants in terms of seeing what it takes to be a successful applicant, and people will be able to match up against the winning app grants.
So they'll know if they didn't get awarded and someone else did, they'll be able to determine the reason why they didn't get awarded?
That's right. And they'll have the examples of the ones that did get awards to see, because those applications will be posted. A lot of information will be made available on those so people can learn from those if they want to come back in the second round and reapply.
Okay, Mr. Adelstein? Yes.
That's right. I agree with that analysis. And we're going to post information about winning applicants and how they scored on.
And that'll be on the web page of your web page?
We'll put that on the web page. The applications are up now so people can see a project description, but we're going to put much more data up as we go through the process.
Let me ask each of you, will the actual score that you come up with be on the web page so the person can see how they're scored and how the people who won are scored?
We will not post the scores.
Okay.
In our view, this first round is to determine a finalist pool, all of whom we would say would be worthy projects of funding.
Do you agree with that too, that you're not going to post the scores?
We haven't determined that yet.
Okay. Because I think as much transparency as you have here, the better, so we don't look into, you know, people complaining that it's either politically or it's done for reasons they're not clear about. Now, is it possible that a lot of people who apply will be subpar? And I mean, are you under the obligation that you have to spend all this money by next September? Is it possible that you could say, by golly, you know, 20 or 30% of these applicants are not qualified. If we give them the money, they can't make the project go, or two, they're going to need to come back for more money.
The measure of success of this program, in my mind, is how many of these projects are still operating 5 years from now.
Good.
We need to be sustainable. We will not fund a project unless we have a high confidence level that it's a sustainable project that will deliver lasting benefits to
So would you
people.
agree then that this morning, this morning, that if you don't find qualified people, you won't spend the money and you will give it back to the taxpayers?
As a theoretical matter, I agree with that, but I would also say we've received $28 billion in requests. I'm reasonably confident, without having looked at a single application, we've got a lot of high-quality applicants in front of us.
Mr. Adelstein, is that how you feel too, that you'll give the money back if they're subpar applicants?
Absolutely. If we don't get qualified applicants for all of the funds, we will not use those funds and we will return those to the Treasury. I think that we have the long experience in carefully evaluating these projects to ensure they're feasible. And one of the scoring criteria we have is the feasibility of it. And we've spent years with a less than 1% default rate on our telecommunications program.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Ensuring that we do not
Now, Mr. Adelstein, you had indicated when I talked to you yesterday that you have a leverage of 14-1 for $500 million that you're going to take off the top. Do you have also a plan of any leverage here that you're using?
No, sir. Under the legislation, RUS has a pre-existing ability to make loans. We do not. All of our projects will be funded as full grants.
Mr. Boucher talked about and showed this map here. You heard from my opening statement a concern that the fact that the mapping's not done, I think only 10 states have completed it, and 10 more in the process, and that the FCC has in place a broadband policy, and none of this will be made available to you before, Mr. Strickland, you talked about in early December that you'll have already spent $1.6 billion, I think you said. Is that correct?
By the end of the year,
yes.
we
Okay.
fully
so
fund, yes.
Does that concern you at all, that you know, the actual mapping of this for the underserved and the people that have never been served is not even available so that you can make a decision?
I'm not sure that's fully accurate, Congressman.
Okay.
What would concern me would be to award a grant in an area if I didn't know it was unserved or
how will you know if it's not been mapped for you?
Well, one way we will know is if there is credible information from a previous state mapping effort, and as a practical matter, if such a map does exist and if the information on it is good, those applications will get additional consideration simply by that fact. However, we have asked all the applicants to provide that information for their areas as well, and we will be evaluating that for its credibility and veracity. And if there is good information coming from the applicants, which will be subject to a public review, then we feel we can rely on that information in determining whether an area is unserved or not.
Would it be safe to say that those states that have mapped that you use those as a priority, will you take into account that some maps have already been made for 10 states and use that as a priority in your decision process?
It receives additional consideration. I don't know if I can go to say it's a priority.
What would you say?
I think it's very valuable information. I know that Commissioner Chong testified before your committee that it was very helpful in California to have the map first, and I think it'd be helpful here. Of course, the purpose of this project being stimulus, in some sense, we're moving ahead, but the mapping that we're putting up on the web as soon as today or tomorrow is going to allow anybody in the public to take a look at the service area that's being proposed for a project and challenge that. Say that, in fact, there is service in an area where somebody says there isn't, and that will be a great way for us to evaluate that particular application in terms of whether that area is served or underserved.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one last question. This is for Mr. Strickling. Your latest report indicates that you have roughly about $318 million in DTV money left over as of August 19th. Now, if you take and extrapolate the redemption rate, 55% redemption rate, in the remaining months of this program, you could have as much as $380 million left over. My question to you is, are you intending and will you return this? And this is ironical in the fact that Mr. Barton and I had a DTV fix bill which would have avoided the need for this costly delay, knowing that you're giving almost $380 million back. So the question is, do you plan to give this money back?
As I understand it, Congressman, the money goes back. We don't have the option under the current legislation to keep the money.
And when would that come back?
As you know, there are still coupons outstanding. I think folks have until November to use those coupons if they haven't already used them. Following that, we'll be closing out the program. So I can't give you a direct date today as to when the program will be closed out and all the accounting will be done, but I would hope it will be early next year.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Stupak, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Adelstein, if I can ask you a few questions, and I want to know a little bit more about the funding, because I think there's some confusion on how the RUS is releasing a total of $2.4 billion in its first round of funding, but still has adequate resources available for the next round. It is my understanding that this is due to the loan grant combination that you have authority over. Can you provide some clarification on that?
I'd be happy to. Congress gave us the authority to provide loans and grant combinations and loans, so that allowed us to leverage our $2.5 billion in budget authority to $7 to $9 billion in loan grant combinations or loans and grants. Many rural communities can be served this way. We can stretch the dollars that we have. Because of our sound track record at USDA, we have a 7.24% subsidy rate, which means that we can take $72,000 and get $1 million worth of loan out of that amount of taxpayer dollars, which means that we can take $500 million from the top of the $2 billion, $2.5 billion, have $2 billion left over for grants, and do $7 billion in loans with that amount. So even though we're taking $2.4 billion in this case, the $2.4 billion is of that total $7 to $9 billion. It's not of the $2.5 billion. This includes the loan amount, which is highly leveraged because of our good track record in getting repaid.
Well, let me ask you this then. Then underneath the stimulus package where you received this money, the $2.5 billion, how much more in loans is the RUS issuing than the agency would normally do under a normal fiscal year under the RUS program?
This is a much greater amount of loans than we have ever done in a single year by a large factor. I mean, we do about, we can do in total, we do quite a few. We can do $1 billion in telecommunications loans, but not broadband loans. We've never done that. We've done $1.1 billion in broadband loans since 2002, and now we're going to be doing $7 billion in 1 year. So it is a huge ramp up of what we have done in the past.
Well, you mentioned ramp up and putting on my Oversight Investigations hat. Then with that much more money, then are you going to have to be bringing on more staff? And I heard some concerns from Mr. Stearns and others about the quality of the loans. In order to make sure you can monitor these grants and loans in this program, obviously you're going to have to bring on more staff.
We are. In fact, we have 114 people now that do telecommunications projects, but we're going to add 50 temporary employees under funding from the Stimulus Act. We also have 470 field offices across the country, and we're drafting people from all those field offices to help us, including expert, we call general field representatives. We've hired an outside contractor to assist in reviewing the first round of applications according to objective scoring criteria. Working closely with them, we're ultimately going to make the decisions based on their assistance. In addition, we have 60 years of experience in doing electric and water and telecom, so we are experienced agency. We're just doing a large volume in short order.
Well, let me ask you this. Stimulus funding basically runs out about September of 2010, but the loans in that won't be repaid. So you're still going to need staff and monitoring of these loans to make sure the repayments well after the stimulus package is basically over, correct?
We absolutely will. It's very important that we continue to monitor these loans to ensure, and the grants, to ensure that they're achieving the purpose for which they were intended. We do a very good job now with our field offices of following up on the loans that we have. With a larger portfolio that we're going to rapidly develop through this, we are exploring our options for ensuring continued oversight after the funding expires.
Mr. Strickling, same with your agency. Are you going to be having more people on to monitor, and even after 2010 to still look at your loans and portfolios and that?
That's correct. And we're in, I think, a slightly different situation perhaps than RUS because they have an existing program. Our program was created by the Recovery Act, and the authorization for it ends September of 2010. So yes, we will need both authorization and hopefully some appropriations to be able to carry out our oversight responsibilities after all of these grants are awarded next summer.
Well, Mr. Strickland, let me ask you this. It's also my understanding under the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, gives weight to projects that can commence immediately upon receiving these funds. One of the concerns I have, being from northern Michigan, if we're not going to make our grants until about November, November where I'm at, the snow is flying by then. It would be hard for us to immediately start. It'd probably be about April, May before you can really get in there because you try to do this in the winter, just increase your cost tremendously. Will that be weighted somehow so we're not have some problems with getting this November round because we can't start the actual infrastructure until in the spring?
That's correct. Shovel ready is our evaluation of the project. It's not whether you're shovel ready in the winter.
Snow shovel ready,
We'll
okay.
understand that, in fact, you may have a shovel ready project in the general scheme of things, but we're certainly not going to penalize applicants because we're happy to be awarding the money in November, and someone might say, well, we can't actually turn dirt when it's under 6 feet of snow.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this, with my law enforcement background, all that, and in the stimulus, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, all right. I'll follow up in writing. I want a question on public safety, and they're a little reluctant, feeling that they don't have the expertise to apply. How do we make sure law enforcement and the value broadband can provide to them? So I'll follow up later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stupak. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have 3 questions, and I'll try to be very quick because I see we have some votes. My first one is tongue-in-cheek, but is there a program for people like me who didn't get a coupon? Have we just missed the boat, or is there some, you know, if you're really, really stupid and really, really lazy, we'll give you one more chance program, or is it? It's
no, sir.
It's gone, huh?
You're out of luck.
All right. Well, I was afraid that was going to be the answer. But that's the right answer, by the way. It should be that way. Next question is about the Universal Service Fund. I don't think it's any secret to you two gentlemen that I'm not a big fan of that program, and I'm working with Mr. Boucher and others, Mr. Markey, to come up with a reform program for it. But in terms of this program that you two gentlemen are implementing, can we be assured that you're only going to award funds to projects that will be sustainable without additional federal funds in the future?
Yes, sir. I think our philosophy will be that there will not be any additional federal or other federal dollars available for these projects beyond what's in front of us in the $4.7 billion we've been given. So we will be evaluating each project for its sustainability past the grant period. And we are not going to assume, oh, yeah, they'll get universal service money or that some other grant program will rescue this project. It's got to be sustainable once our monies end.
Mr. Adelstein, do you share that view?
Absolutely. Our scoring criteria count project sustainability and project viability among the highest categories for awarding funds. We generally look very closely at the balance sheets and at the financial spreadsheets of these companies with our experience as basically a lender with a $54 billion loan portfolio. We are very experienced at evaluating the financial capability of companies and their sustainability. Particularly when it comes to the loan component, we want to make sure we get paid back.
Okay. Last question. I see some conflicts or potential conflicts of interest in the administration of the grant program that Mr. Strickling is implementing. The statute directs that the NTIA consult with the states about which applications to grant, but the states themselves are eligible for these grants. Secondly, you're going to be soliciting volunteers to evaluate the grants, but your volunteers might also be involved with the industries that would benefit from receiving the grants. Mr. Secretary, what mechanisms are you putting in place to try to prevent such conflicts of interest in these two areas?
Yes, sir. With respect to the states, the statute specifies that the states should have this role. So I think if it is a conflict, it's a conflict everybody can see and everybody can evaluate, and we will act accordingly. With respect to the reviewers, we have very strict conflict of interest policies, and in fact, we've already rejected about 10% of the experts who have come forward to offer their services on either lack of expertise or because they have a conflict due to their employer. But basically, if you work for a company that is making a grant application of its own, you will not be allowed to review any application in any state in which your employer's application might apply. And certainly you won't be able to review your employer's application. If you work for a broadband service provider, you will not be allowed, whether or not that company has filed an application, you will not be allowed to review an application in any state in which your employer offers service. So we feel that we can still take advantage of the expertise of folks, but we are going to sequester them away from any application where there would be any actual or apparent conflict of interest.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barton. We now have 3 votes pending on the floor of the House, and that will probably require at least a half hour in order to accomplish. So I'm going to recess the subcommittee, and we will return to continue our questions with you as soon as this roll call is finished. The subcommittee will reconvene, and I want to thank Mr. Strickland and Mr. Adelstein for their patience as we finished our business on the floor of the House for the day. The gentlelady from California is next to propound her questions, and she's recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Matsui.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To ensure that more Americans will have access to broadband internet service, we have to address not only the populations who don't have access to broadband, but those who have access but are not able to afford such services. In California, an estimated 96% of California residences have access to broadband. But the problem is adoption, since barely more than half of Californians have adopted broadband at home. In most cases, adoption rates are associated with income, as seen in the recent data from the Public Policy Institute of California. We show that only 58% of Californians earning under $40,000 a year subscribe to broadband at home, but 97% of those earning $80,000 or more subscribe to this. And so it's clear that millions of Americans cannot afford either computer or internet services. In April, I, along with 6 of my colleagues who serve on this subcommittee, wrote urging the FCC, NTIA, and RUS to consider low-income populations to be part of the definition of underserved as it applied to broadband grant programs. To fully close the digital divide, we must address the affordability of broadband for lower-income families. Although these families may have different options for broadband access, in my opinion, they're underserved if none of these options are affordable. Mr. Strickling, during your rulemaking process, how much of a factor did you consider income and affordability in the definition of underserved?
Excuse me. As you know, the definition we ultimately adopted did not include that as a test, but we absolutely were thinking about it. And our final judgment was that using an adoption rate really got at the issue and might be explained. In other words, we have a rate that says if an area is showing less than 40% adoption, it's underserved. We feel there may be any number of explanations for that, including the factors you described, but we chose to go right to the heart of the issue, which was the adoption rate, and make that the standard in the definition. And I will point out that among the 2,200 applications we received, we do have a separate part of our program that's focused on sustainable adoption projects. We received over 320 applications from entities that want to perform these sorts of sustainable adoption projects, and they've asked for about $2.5 billion. So it is an area that we view very seriously. We absolutely agree with you that looking at the demand side of this equation is just as important as looking at the supply side, and we need to understand why folks aren't able to adopt these services, and we are going to have an opportunity now with the monies available in the Recovery Act to fund a number of different approaches to increasing those adoption rates.
Oh, I certainly do appreciate that, because that's going to be a very important factor moving forward. I'd like to also say that many households are underserved urban communities either don't have a computer or cannot afford internet service, and now they rely upon local schools and libraries for their broadband services. And especially in these tough economic times, more and more people are relying on the computers at their libraries for a job, employment services, managing their finances even, because they can't afford the internet service. So I think it's critically important that these schools and libraries serving urban underserved communities be properly considered during the grant process. So, Mr. Stickling, how are you handling applications for schools and libraries in urban underserved areas?
We're very interested in receiving those applications because, as you've just pointed out, if folks don't have a computer in their own home, the ability to go to a local library or go to a local school after hours to get access to the internet on a broadband service offered in those institutions is perhaps their only ability to go online. So we understand the importance of it. In our scoring criteria, the presence in a project application of
Mr. Stickling, do you have standards that apply? to this?
Well, I was about to say that we will be giving additional consideration to those projects that come to us that are able to incorporate working with these community anchor institutions as part of the overall project design.
I'd like to follow up with that later on, too, if that's possible.
Absolutely.
I see I'm running out of time, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matsui. The gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sorry I couldn't be with you earlier this morning. I had conflicting duties that I had to attend to. First, I'd like to ask that my opening statement be inserted into the record
without objection.
Place. I have questions for both of our witnesses. I'm troubled out in the state of Oregon that the two largest providers of telecommunications in my district that cover about 80% of the territory, Quest and CenturyLink, both have chosen not to apply for grants, and they cited uncertainty of the consequences of accepting grant money. Issues about ill-defined network, non-discrimination requirements, prohibition on sales of facilities, how all that works, the cumbersome application process. How will constituents in a district as vast and underserved as mine benefit from the Broadband Stimulus Grant Program if the rules and regulations of the program scare away the big providers, the big folks who can participate, and frankly the only ones that are poised to participate in a district like mine? Well, are you finding this elsewhere around the country?
Well, but the first comment I would make is 2,200 applications were filed seeking $28 billion of funding. When we issued our notice of funds availability, we heard from all manner of folks that the criteria were too strict, that the rules were too confusing, yet 2,200 people were able to submit applications who navigated their way through the process.
Do you have a breakout by state or district?
I do. I have, your district has 14 applications in it. So there were 14 applicants in your district, two in Oregon, that were able to
right. I know Ben Broadband, I believe, is one.
And that's just for our program. There may be some additional ones for BTOP as well.
All right. Could I get that list at some point?
Absolutely. Get that to you immediately.
How is this? One of the issues I raised when this was going through was how the process, the timing would work. I had concerns that, you know, and I know you're now going to have like 3 tranches of money that goes out, because the mapping in Oregon, the rough maps will be available in November. The complete won't be ready till February. So in the first round, you don't really know. You don't have the mapping done.
The National Broadband Map has a deadline of February 2011.
Right. But in the state of Oregon, for example, the first round we'll be done with our mapping by February of 2010.
Okay.
So that'll work in like the second round, correct?
Yes, but again, I don't think the presence of a state map is a magic bullet here. We want to be awarding grants, the infrastructure grants in the unserved and underserved areas. We want to be confident that they are that. A map helps us make that judgment if it's got credible data that went into it, but there are other ways to get that information as well. Each applicant was required to supply that sort of information, and if they have given us credible data, we will rely on that in making grants.
So how is the definition of remote rural that's used in the application developed? My understanding is only remote rural areas are eligible for 100% funding from RUS. RUS defines an unserved area as remote rural if it's at least 50 miles from a non-rural area. And yet I'm hearing from some that projects may not be able to meet this criteria, that few, if any, will meet this criteria.
We actually set aside $400 million under that category, and we received $3.8 billion in loan requests for that $400 million. So we are well oversubscribed 10 to 1. So a number of applicants did find that they were in areas that were remote. Now, we haven't verified that, in fact, they were in remote areas, but we have an overwhelming demand for that category. The RUS really wants to serve the hardest to reach, most rural areas of the United States, and that was our goal. The previous administration was criticized for moving some RUS funding into areas that were too suburban or too close to urban areas, and we tried to push it out. But I certainly understand concerns about that, and we're looking at that. But there's a lot of interest in those, as well as the people applying for the loan grant combinations.
So help me on this definition a bit. If you define an unserved area as remote rural, if it's at least 50 miles from a non-rural area, what's that? How are those terms defined? What's a non-rural area?
A non-rural area is defined as not being urban, and an urban area is defined as an area that is either 20,000 people or an urbanized area contiguous to a city or town of 50,000 or more. So you have to be 50 miles from the limit of those two areas.
All right. Okay. I had just one other question that I wanted to ask. I believe that the stimulus funding should, of course, go first to those that aren't served. I mean, and you were here as a commissioner. I mean, you understand that debate that sometimes this money goes out and has in the past areas that have multiple services. And I think it ought to go to individuals, businesses, institutions that don't have access to broadband at all, rather than better service those who do. Is that the prioritization NTIA is going to use?
Well, under the statute, we're going to focus on unserved and underserved areas. And bear in mind, an underserved area is an area that may only have 50% or fewer of their residents available to sign up for service. So there's a large body of people in an underserved area that they themselves individually are unserved. So I think that in making our grants, we're going to be cognizant of both of those sets of issues, both the unserved and the underserved, which will contain many unserved people.
All right. Well, let me be the one that weighs in on for the limited amount of government resource we have, it ought to go to those who don't have access to any service first. I would just, that's my own opinion. And I know my time's expired. Mr. Chairman, a unanimous consent request that the written statement of Mr. Blunt be included in the hearing.
Without objection. Thank you very much, Mr. Walden. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshu, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses again and for your patience in waiting for us while we completed our work on the floor for today. I have some questions, and I just want to put my questions out and then have you respond to them. I want to go back to my opening statement and just reemphasize, I mean, it's not a question, just to set it down again, that, that when this charge of the Congress to you to implement has been completed, that when we not only look at the map and see the work you've done in underserved and unserved areas, that, that the broadband will be really at the highest level in terms of speed. And that's really a top priority for me, and I think that those communities deserve that, and it's going to be in your hands to help to see that that happens. Now, you're in the first round, and whether you're going to just do a second round and not have to do a third, I mean, obviously that's going to be up to you. But in the first round of applications, how many included requests for waivers of information? The reason that I ask that is because it's my understanding that there were applicants who claimed that they were unable to apply due to software issues and problems, not being resolved before the deadline. So I'd like to know, my first question is, what steps you're taking to ensure that the process runs smoother in the next round. And I'd also like to know more about the process whereby incumbents can challenge applications that seek to serve underserved areas. Now, in the BTOP and the BIP, the notice of available funding, it provides for existing service providers an opportunity to challenge and demonstrate that a project is not unserved or underserved. What I want to make sure of is that there's competition. And if the incumbents can just knock out people because they don't want any competition to come in, I don't really think that's the way for us to go. So does this mean that an applicant will have to provide proprietary information? That's why I was asking the question about requests for waivers. That, I think, would undercut their ability to compete. And other than the most obvious cases where there's competition, what's the criteria for deciding? How do you weigh in on this? And what's the administrative process in place for challenges and counter-challenges and fact-finding? So you can tell what my questions are. And I also would like to add a comment to reinforce what Congresswoman Matsui raised about anchor institutions. I think it's a very important one. And the two of us are going to follow up with you with some more questions in writing. But I think that these anchor institutions bear that designation in our communities because they really are anchors. That's where people go when they don't have these tools at home or can't afford them. So anyway, those are my questions. I don't know who wants to take them on.
Let me take each of your issues up in
order.
First, the speed question. The eligibility requirements to apply set the 768 kilobits per second as a threshold to make you eligible to apply. I would be very surprised, but what most of these applications are proposing substantially faster speeds. And if one has proposed a faster speed, you get additional consideration in the scoring of your application.
Oh, good. So they're good. So the scoring is weighted for the higher speeds.
That's correct.
That's great.
What we didn't want to do at the front end of the process was basically, there may be areas of this country where the only practical technology to be used is at a roughly 768 or a kilobit per second speed. We didn't want to basically determine at the front end of this that nobody could apply from those sorts of areas. We wanted to at least be able to consider them. And if in fact 3G wireless is the only opportunity, the only option for a given area, we'd like to at least be able to consider whether or not to fund it. But again, higher speeds get more votes or greater scores and should rise to the top of the review. In terms of the application processing, the 2 weeks when folks were rushing to put their applications through, it is correct that certain applicants experienced difficulties. But I think what I would urge you to consider is that during that period, both of our agencies were in constant contact with each other, and we were taking remedial measures to fix the problems as they arose. So in the first week, it became apparent that because of the size of the attachments we were getting from many applicants, we didn't have enough server capacity. The result was we, I think, doubled or tripled the number of servers that were available to receive the information. It later turned out that there was some sort of browser incompatibility. Some people using certain older browsers were running into some compatibility issues. We identified that as a problem, alerted the applicant pool that they ought to use a particular browser as a way to avoid that problem, and again, we think that was fixed. We extended the deadline, so anybody who had started an application by the original application date was given an extra, I think, 6 days to get their full application in. During that 6 days, we had many days where people weren't coming on the system, that there was plenty of capacity, plenty of opportunity, yet we still ran into the natural human tendency to wait to the last minute, and people did that even though every day we were emailing the applicant pool saying, there's nobody online, now's the time to get on and put your application in. At the last minute, on the last day, there were still some people who apparently had some problems getting attachments uploaded, and on the last day we alerted those people and gave them the option of sending those attachments in by, on a thumb drive or on a disk so that we could add them to the application. So I think the responses of RUS and NTIA during those 2 weeks showed a very strong emphasis on supporting the applicants as they were trying to get their way through the system. Both of our organizations are committed to doing an evaluation of our systems before we do the second round, and if there are improvements above and beyond the ones we made, we absolutely intend to make them. On your third point, because I want to give Jonathan a chance to weigh in as well, the incumbents do not have a veto here. As we've been discussing, we
Can you describe the way it works?
I'm sorry?
Can you describe the way it works?
The applicants have indicated the areas that they believe are unserved or underserved as part of their application. That information will be going up on our database, and anyone, but in particular service providers in those areas, will have an ability to say, well, wait a second, we disagree with that. But if they're going to do that, they're going to have to provide a lot of information to us in order to overcome the presumption that will have been established by the applicant. beyond that, that will then become an issue that, if necessary, we will have to evaluate either at RUS or at NTIA in order before we make a grant award if something has been thrown in dispute. But we'll have that decision. It won't be made by any incumbent. They will not have the ability to veto another applicant from being able to offer service in their area. Jonathan, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, as usual, since we're so coordinated, we agree. Everything that Mr. Strickling had to say, I would just say for our purpose at RUS, speed does matter for us as well. We have additional points for higher speeds. The 768 is a floor. That was the FCC definition that Commissioner Copps and I spent years trying to get up from 200.
I know you did. You devoted several years of your life to that.
We sure did, and we got it moved up. But we don't want that to be the basis. That's the floor, and we build from there.
Good.
So there is reward for higher speeds. In terms of the challenge process, Mr. Strickling is exactly right. We're going to demand real substantiation, but we also want to ensure that what the applicants are asserting is correct. This is an unprecedented transparency that we're going to conduct. We're going to put all those maps up on the web so anybody can look at them. The entire public is our other IG to make sure that people are being accurate about their representing whether or not an area is unserved or underserved. But the final determination is by RUS and NTIA. We're going to make that determination. All claims and challenges have to be verified and substantiated. We have field offices in every state in the country, many of them in California, 470 offices across the country, and we're planning on sending our general field representatives out to substantiate these things, to actually find out what's happening in the communities. Our state directors have volunteered to help us as well to make sure that we really get an accurate picture of what's happening in those communities. And this could be a useful building block also, of course, for NTIA's map that they're working on to give us real data about what's happening in those communities. But we're not going to let incumbents just knock people out willy-nilly. They're going to have to prove their case. But on the other hand, we welcome them to challenge and to get to the bottom line truth as to what is happening in those areas to make sure that we're targeting our funds at areas that are truly underserved.
You have the capacity to make those determinations with your staff?
It's going to be a challenge. I mean, we're having to basically take people that are normally doing other work and put them onto this job. But given what challenge Congress has put before us, we think that is a valuable reprioritization of our staff, and we're working with all of our staff to get them ready for that process.
Thank you, Ms. Eshoo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses, and I thank you for your patience.
The gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the concerns I had, I think, Mr. Chairman, you brought up in your opening remarks, and that is Vermont is a very rural state, but sometimes under the standards isn't considered rural. So I hope that the concerns expressed by the chairman, I know, having been expressed by the chairman, will be taken quite seriously by you. Thank you for your testimony. Just a couple of questions. Broadband obviously is big everywhere, including in Vermont, but simply building the infrastructure doesn't guarantee that people will use it. And one way to help increase the success rate of rural broadband projects is to improve the business case by increasing take rates. And there wasn't a way, as I understand it, in the first round for someone to propose a combination of sustainable adoption and the infrastructure project. And I'm wondering whether the NTIA will consider this in the next rounds.
That's not entirely true. We actually encourage people to combine project purposes. Our systems require that they, in effect, submit 2 separate applications, and we are going to look for the second round is there a way to solve the administrative issue, but we absolutely encourage people to combine adoption thinking with an infrastructure project, and those projects will be considered in tandem as they go through the process.
Okay, great, thank you. The second round, states like Vermont are going to be focused on filling out our remaining broadband service gaps. Those are likely to be found, of course, in smaller and more discontiguous pieces. And I'm wondering what will NTIA do to help applicants qualify who are trying to turn what is essentially a Swiss cheese pattern of coverage into blocks of consistent 100% coverage?
To the extent that we identify that as a problem after we see the applications we've seen, because it may well be that folks have figured out ways to do that as we go through these applications. And certainly, if we get those sorts of learnings from the application pool we have, we will find a way to make those learnings available to the general pool. But if it's a continuing issue, we are going to look at how to continue to tweak and refine our outreach efforts for the second round to provide whatever guidance we can to people to help them navigate their way through those issues.
Okay. Last question. One problem we see in Vermont is that clusters of served households tend to be distributed among a number of different neighboring census blocks that also in those census blocks contain unserved households, and it is making it harder to define the unserved areas using census blocks as the measurement. And I'm wondering whether NTIA will allow applicants a little bit more flexibility to define their service areas to better conform to essentially relate to the facts on the ground, the boundaries of served and underserved areas.
I frankly would be surprised if that's really a problem for folks who understood the process, because they could define their service area by linking together whatever census blocks they wanted to. And in terms of meeting our test, all they had to do was either meet the unserved test for that entire set of blocks or the underserved test, either one. And I would expect that folks who understood their neighborhoods in their service areas could create those sorts of service areas for the purposes of our projects that would have qualified as underserved or unserved. There was a misconception early on that you had to demonstrate that each census block in your application was either unserved or underserved, and that's not correct. You had to define a service area as a grouping of census blocks, and then we looked at that in the aggregate to say, does that satisfy the unserved definition or does it satisfy the underserved definition? And again, I think folks, again, gauging from the 2,200 applications we received, found ways to define their services in a way to qualify.
Okay, thank you very much. I thank the witnesses, and I thank the chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Welsh. The gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing. I look forward to discussing with the committee and Mr. Strickland our Spectrum Relocation Improvement Act, which we hope to move forward on, and Mr. Upton and I have introduced, and Ranking Member Stearns. But a couple questions for Mr. Strickland. We heard from Washington State that the NTIA's application review process has changed so that it would put the first round on the states. And could you confirm for us that that has not changed and that NTIA is still going to retain the original review process?
Yes, Congressman. I can confirm that information, I'm not sure how it arose, but it is not accurate in terms of what the role of the states will be. As we discussed earlier in the hearing, the states are being asked to provide us prioritizations if they wish to. They are not being asked to review applications. No decisions have been handed over to them. We retain the ultimate decision-making authority on those grants. The states will provide input to the process just as the legislation expects.
I welcome your statement in that regard, and that would obviate the problems if we had 50 different sets of prioritization rules that could end up, so you don't see that as being a problem?
No, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Inslee. I'm going to raise one additional concern with each of you that has come to my attention since my round of questions ended some time ago.
Breaking news.
And I want to come back to the fact that if you're a rural applicant, you basically have to apply through RUS. You can apply jointly to be considered by both agencies, but your application has to be reviewed and acted on by RUS before NTIA has an opportunity to act on it. And the concern is this, that RUS could review the application and decide that it is not eligible for the 80% to 100% grant because, for example, it is a non-remote area, maybe one of these little pockets that is fairly close to a city, even if it's isolated, and would be deemed non-remote under that definition, which we hope to see changed. And if that were to happen, RUS might still find that that application could be eligible for a 50% grant or for some grant-loan combination. Whereas if NTIA had been looking at that application standing on its own, it could have been qualified for a grant of between 80 and 100%. So there is a barrier here that many applicants may face, where under NTIA standard, a grant of 80% to 100% could be provided, but where under RUS, the maximum grant is only 50%. And I would hope that at a minimum, as you consider modifying these standards for your next round, that you would enable applications to be acted upon based upon the higher level of funding that could be provided by either agency, so that the barrier I've just identified would be removed. So I guess first let me ask you if I've properly interpreted the standards as they've been put forth. And secondly, if you would consider some change that would address the circumstance, assuming I have properly interpreted them.
That could be an issue. However, I would respond that if they can qualify for a grant loan combination, that would be a wiser use of taxpayer dollars. We want to minimize the amount of grant so that we can maximize the amount of rural broadband infrastructure that we can leverage to get out to the consumers. So if in fact there is an application that would be viable, that would be able to repay that 50%, we actually designed the system to encourage that. That's one of the reasons the system is designed the way it is, with the RUS getting that first look at it, so that we could try to stretch those taxpayer dollars as far as we possibly could. Obviously the point isn't to maximize the amount of grant that a particular applicant gets, but rather to give them the minimum amount they need in order to provide broadband and have a viable, sustainable business.
Let me just say, I don't disagree with that. I think you're exactly right, to the extent that the full project, as it is anticipated by the applicant and applied for, can be built with something less than full grant. Obviously, it's optimal to do so. But in those instances where that can't happen, and you deem the project ineligible for the full grant but offer a 50% grant, and a grant of a higher level could be provided by your sister agency that might enable the full project to be built and built more rapidly or in a better way. It seems to me that that potential should be preserved, and under the existing regulation, I think it's not.
I think it could, because a joint application, they could apply to us for 50% and apply to NTA for 100% the way we design the application system. So they'd apply to us at 50%. If it wasn't viable, and we're very good at doing the business analysis to determine whether or not that would be viable at that rate, we would then kick that to NTA and say, these people aren't going to be able to repay that loan. This business case can't be made, but it's a very good project. That would then automatically be kicked over to NTA, which is simultaneously been reviewing the process, been reviewing that application.
So you're saying that if your analysis determines that the full project for which the application is made can be built with something less than the higher level of grant, then that would be what the applicant receives. But it would be your determination that the full project can be built for that amount.
Right. If we determine that the full project can't be sustained.
And if you determine it cannot be, that the full project cannot be built for that amount, for the maximum amount for which under the application they're qualified, then NTIA could take it from there and potentially fund it at the higher level to fund the full project. Is that accurate?
Exactly.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate your indulgence. Let me just quickly ask my staff a question. She says yes. All right. I want to thank you. You have been very patient today, including sitting through a lengthy recess while we finished our business on the floor of the House. And I appreciate the thorough answers you have provided to all of our questions. As you could hear expressions on a bipartisan basis today, there is concern by members about the definition of remote, and I very much hope that you will address that before you put the NOFRA out for the second round of funding. You've heard our other concerns, and to the extent that you can consider and make modifications to accommodate those, that would be much appreciated as well. We will be having, as Mr. Stearns recommended, at least another hearing to oversee this program at some appropriate time, yet to be determined, and we will welcome you back when that hearing occurs. Thank you for your testimony and your participation today, and this hearing stands adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good job, Larry.